magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. Where you gonna be tonight? Oh, oh, oh. There's magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. Get ready for the rest of your life. Hello, beautiful humans, and welcome to SassafrasCast. I am your host, Rorie Kelly, a tarot reader, singer-songwriter, and all-around personal growth nerd from Long Island, New York. This is a podcast full of witchy insights to help you lead your sassiest life. There, now I've said all the sentences that I try to say at the beginning of a broadcast. How are you today? So this is my first podcast back after SassafrasCast Teaches You Tarot, which was a really fun thing to do, and I have to say, it's something I started a little bit in desperation of just being really overloaded in the middle of last summer, because there were about 6 episodes of it, I think. And I just didn't always have the bandwidth to put together an episode that I felt was worth sharing with y'all. And I was like, well, I could teach tarot. That would take at least 4 or 5 or 6 episodes and solve that problem for a while. And you know what? It was the right problem. And the reason I share that about with you, it was the right problem to solve in the moment. And it led to some really cool stuff. I'm now teaching a tarot course called Keys to the Kingdom. I'm in the middle of teaching it. Some of you listening are even taking it, and I'm really grateful for you and grateful for that opportunity. By the way, if you're tuned in as a patron, you can feel free to comment in the chat. I might include your comments and questions and ideas into the live broadcast. That's kind of how I do this. I broadcast live for patrons, and then everybody gets the full recording after the fact that goes out to all the different podcast places. So if you're listening to this as a podcast, know that if you become a patron, you can hop on the live recording and be a part of the show. Speaking of which, I'm going to get ready with this episode in just a moment, but let's first do a shout out to my patrons. If you were not aware, you can support this podcast at patreon.com/Sassafras Tarot for $1 a month or more. I record these episodes live, and my patrons get a private YouTube link before each one so they can tune in for a live recording, hang out in the chat, ask questions, and get them answered in real time. They also get access to my Discord server where we talk about all things witchy and wonderful, and they get a shout out in every episode. Here we go. Thank you, Amanda Curry, Melissa Marie Imagery, Rachel Miller, Grayson, Millie Orozco, Ruby, Rebecca Jones, Brittany, Hannah Westlock, Brittany Campbell, and Jennifer McPhail. I'm so grateful you're in my world. Some of y'all tuned in might also be music patrons. Some of you know I'm also a singer-songwriter. I sure hope you know that, because that's basically my life. And for a long time, I have practiced reciprocity between my 2 Patreons. This is just a public service announcement for anyone who's in either one. If you're in the music patron, you get access to the Sassafras benefits at the $1 level. And if you're in the Sassafras Patreon, then you get access to the music benefits at the $1 level. And the way I do that is through Discord. So I have a Discord server for each one, and all the $1 benefits go into the Discord so everyone can access them. And those of you who've been around for a while also know that I'm like, I don't know, I just practice like what I consider to be basic decency, which is that if someone has to pause their membership for a while or, has to downgrade due to life circumstances or something, I let them stay in the Discord because that way they can still get access to the community and the content, and that's, I let them hang out for a little while, basically, because I know life can be up and down, and I don't want people to have to feel like, I don't want the admin for me of having to add and remove, and I also just feel like if you've supported me, I'm grateful that you're here. So that's my public service announcement. I guess that leaves me open to people like taking advantage, knowing that, but I don't really care. I feel like that's the way I want to run my life and my career. Anyway, can you tell this episode is outlined, not scripted? Because I go off on more tangents when it's that way. But I also feel it's a more direct and conversational thing. So there's always there's always finding the line between those two things, between over-scripting and being able to have a conversational, really connected broadcast and episode. Hydration checkpoint, everybody. I will be doing these on and off throughout the broadcast. I am sipping on water. How about you from home? Feel free to play the Sassafras drinking game, which means when I do a hydration checkpoint, you also drink. You could also make probably some other fun SassafrasCast drinking games, like whenever I talk about the shadow, take a drink. If you're drinking alcoholic beverages, be careful. That'll come up a lot in this episode. I'm not I'm not advocating that you harm yourself in this way. So we're talking today about releasing and banishing. The title of this episode is Releasing, Banishing, and My Year of No. And I want to talk about all three topics as they're related. And I brought up in the introduction that the reason I did the Sassafras Cast Teaches You Tarot series, which is about a 6-month series, was largely because I was overwhelmed, was because I was working so much, especially during the summer as a performing musician. My schedule gets more and more busy and there's more travel in the summer. And excuse me, it's not a podcast if I don't have like little hiccups here and there. And what happens is in the summer it's hard for me to like maintain my podcast schedule, but I'm committed to it. It's important to me, and I don't always feel like I have the time to do a full episode and like write something and share something that's worth everybody hearing it. And so last summer I decided I can do Sassafras Cast Teaches You Tarot, because that will give me 5 or 6 episodes, and those can just come out of thin air because such is my knowledge and experience with the tarot. Like, I can't shut up about the tarot. I've had at the time I had one-on-one tarot students more than once, and I know that just going through and teaching the deck would be 5 episodes, and I knew that I would have another couple episodes worth of content that were just about deepening your practice and good, like how to be a good reader, and that's really what happened. And what's cool about that is it really opened up this portal for me to step more fully into teaching the tarot, which isn't something I realized I would enjoy so incredibly much. But I'm now in the middle of a course called Keys to the Kingdom, which is an 8-week tarot course. Some of y'all are in it. And it's been incredibly rewarding to get to teach in this very, very, in this kind of online classroom way, and in a very very detailed way. You know, I go into more depth than I do with podcast episodes. The podcast episodes are also there as like supplemental material for anyone who's in the course, but it's not structured exactly the same way, and it's really developed at you becoming a great reader, rather like you becoming the reader you're meant to be, rather than just like here's the definitions of the cards, which I think anyone can teach you, and which I myself tried to teach you in Sassafras Cast Teaches You Tarot. It's really meant to be a more personal approach that allows you to discover and utilize your own strengths as a reader, because every reader is different, and that's a good thing, not a bad thing, right? We don't want carbon copies of of the same tarot reader a bunch of times. That's the beauty of intuition, and it's the beauty of all of us having unique personalities and goals and desires, is that a tarot reading with me is right for some people, and a tarot reading with someone else is right for somebody else, and that's a special ecosystem. Anyway, I ended up teaching that course partly as a result of choosing to do Sassafras Cast Teaches You Tarot. The other thing that ultimately came out of me having to make decisions like that again and again, which is like, wow, I've overcommitted myself, it's too much, now what do I do, is that I am in recovery right now. I say that in a personal way. I'm in a personal form of recovery for workaholism. And I've talked on and off about being a workaholic like my entire adult life, and it has never, I say it, so I joke about it sometimes, but it's never just a joke. It's always for realsies. And I really, this fall, I hit a bottom. That's something that the recovery community, like that's a term that is used in the recovery community, which is you hit a bottom and you realize that like things have to change. So sometimes a bottom can be very painful, but it's like also you can only go up from here, and you realize that things have to change, and it lights the fire under your ass to make the change you need to make. Now, for me, that was renouncing workaholism, and what that looks like as a self-employed person who is, you know, a provider who has like, you know, a mortgage and a family to take care of, has been a real roller coaster and adventure, but it's one that I'm really glad that I have continued to stay committed to, imperfectly, as you'll hear in the podcast. And so part of this podcast is going to be about that, my journey about that. And how does this all relate to releasing and banishing and saying no? Well, apart from any recovery journey being about saying no, right? Setting a boundary with yourself and largely with society. A lot of the things that I personally need recovery from are things that society celebrates. Workaholism is something that society celebrates. A lack of self care and externalized focus on, like, quote unquote, real productivity, which usually means socially sanctioned productivity, versus self care, is this comes directly out of capitalism and patriarchy and a lot of shame stories that are kind of ingrained into our Western culture. And setting that boundary with myself required me setting a boundary with the whole rest of the world. It required me, as a recovering people pleaser as well, to say, no, I won't buy into that culture anymore. No, I won't congratulate it anymore. No, I won't participate in it anymore. And that requires me, too, being willing to like strongly disagree with other people in my community about kind of what is right and what is moral. You know what I mean? And that's what we do when we show up strongly for self care. We also have to set boundaries with ourselves and with others. So, this episode is also about boundaries. Good morning, friends. I see a couple of patrons tuning in the chat. It's really good to see you. It's really good to have you here. I started today a little reminder message. I always do that on Discord, and I did that on Facebook today as well. And patrons, if you get those messages and you don't like them, you can just feel free to leave the chat. My feelings won't be hurt. It's really just me trying to be helpful, because I know sometimes a last minute reminder is helpful. Anyway, let's go into the witchy weather report, and then we're going to get into the meat of this episode. I have a lot to talk about. I'm glad to be doing an episode like this again, where I really go deep with a topic, which isn't to say that my last 6 or 7 episodes on teaching you tarot haven't been like that. I just am excited to go into a topic more about personal growth and how that relates to folk magic and how that relates to your spirituality, and not just kind of the straight and narrow of like, how do the thing, how do tarot. I really love teaching tarot, and I also really love talking about these deeper personal topics. I want to share something that Brittany put in the comments. It's so difficult to recover from our bad habits that society celebrates, especially when they start to demonize you for finally taking care of your needs and health. Yeah, that's something I want to talk about a little more in depth in this episode, which is that when we say no, especially when we say no to something that is culturally sanctioned by society, and that is something that I think everyone in any type of recovery has experienced. If you are in recovery for alcoholism, well, a culture that kind of yells at people to, like, why aren't you drinking when they're out on a Friday night? You have to say no to that culture. And that can cause difficulties in your conversations and interpersonal relationships. If you're in recovery for workaholism, it's all well and good for me to say I'm trying not to overwork, because most people want to hear that. But going into, like, there's so much congratulations for people who do overwork. There's like, yeah, go get it, hustle, do the thing. And there's this real, especially in, like, I'm a musician and in the freelance music community, it's like, wow, good for you, you're overbooked. And it's like, no, actually, sleep and self-care are important, even if you're doing something you love. If you're in recovery for an eating disorder and you have to come to a place of regulated care around your nutrition intake and around your body care and your exercise, that's something you can't walk away from fully. You can't just say, I won't eat, right? You have to find a healthy relationship with it, and that requires challenging a lot of really toxic and harmful societal ideals about what is healthy, about equating healthy with thin, and what's good and bad, and like these moral judgments around your food intake. And that's something that, like, as soon as you say, okay, I'm releasing that from my experience, you have all this stuff to grapple with. So here we're going to talk about magic, and we're also going to talk a lot about psychology in this episode. So first, let's do the witchy weather report. This is the time when I pull a card and talk to you a little bit about the synchronicity of the moment and give us all some generalized guidance for the month. I'm reading today with the Tarot of the Abyss by Anne Torian, which is a beautiful black and white, like, line art tarot. It's absolutely gorgeous. Some of the interpretations of the cards are also kind of unique and really beguiling, dare I say it. Like, they really draw you in. So let me do some shuffling. Tarot ASMR, getting those good shuffly noises in there. And one more. I will let you know we're having, at this moment that I'm recording this, the moon is full and beginning to wane. And the full moon's a great time to make a big, public, visible push for what you really want and try to put yourself out there for your goals. And then as the moon begins to wane, it's time for recovery. It's time to move into an atmosphere of self-care, and also move into an atmosphere of considering how far you've come, like almost an epilogue atmosphere where you tie up your loose ends and you look at what has been accomplished and you look at what hasn't worked, kind of doing the post-mortem, and begin to kind of bring yourself back into your equilibrium. That is what is favored during the waning moon. Now, you may be listening to this way in the future at any point in the moon cycle, so, your mileage may vary here. My intention when I pull this card for the Witchy Weather Report is that wherever and whenever it find you, that it have meaning for you right in the moment. Whether you're listening live, whether you're listening a few days later after it gets released, or whether you are listening, 3 years in the future and binging my podcast. If so, in all cases, thank you. Our card of the moment is the Eight of Swords, and I will share with you. The Eight of Swords is also my personal card for the year. I'll let anyone know who's listening that there is a video version of this podcast. It doesn't go all the way back to the beginning. I only started after I interviewed Patty Bell from Soul Shepherd, because I realized it was an effective way to interview someone. And she pointed out to me, now you have a video. Are you going to post it? And I was like, oh, I should. So I now post every episode. I do it as a live broadcast for the patrons, and then it goes on YouTube after. So you can check out if you ever want to look at the card art. I always hold it up during the Witchy Weather Report. This is the Eight of Swords. We see a figure here who's really bound and tied up, and there's a bunch of swords around them. However, the swords aren't like actively harming her. They're just kind of in the region. This figure is bound by looks like rags, or ribbon, like something kind of loose, not like hard rope. And semi-blindfolded here, we see this figure with one eye covered and one eye uncovered but closed. And that gives us a really good hint to what the card is about. I teach my tarot students to say what you see before consulting the book if you're new to tarot, so that you allow your intuition to have a chance, and then you can cross-reference that with the traditional meanings and really build a rich personal library of nuanced tarot readings. Whoops, I can't stop teaching tarot. Sorry, everyone, it's an addiction. The Eight of Swords is about something I'll be talking about in depth later in this episode, which is when our external limitations become internalized, and the past where we felt disempowered has entered into our personal ecosystem, into our subconscious, into our mind, into our fear stories, and now we are the ones disempowering ourselves because we have internalized a belief of what we can and cannot do. So the Eight of Swords is about us needing to break free, not from present disempowerment and present oppression, but from oppression and disempowerment from the past that has hooked into our brains and convinced us that we are less or less capable than we need to be to meet this current challenge. The Eight of Swords, in short, is about needing to reclaim our power. And I'll share with you that I'm working with this card every day because it's my guide card for the year. And it's not the first time this has come up as a guide card for me. And this is also like what recovery work looks like. And I speak now of in every sense of the word. I've been on a real journey to heal myself, and like psychologically, and that means internal and external changes to show up for myself better. And it means looking backwards in order to unhook some of those internalized beliefs and internalized harm patterns in order to free myself, to move forward more in my power. And that is the name of the game when it comes to the Eight of Swords. So I want to ask you, what does it look like for you right now? If you're feeling disempowered, can we get a little bit closer to the roots of that? Can we ask ourselves why we're feeling so disempowered right now? Can we ask ourselves if it's reminding us of anything from our past, especially if we've got stories coming up like It's always like this. This always happens to me. It's always this. It's this way for other people, but it's this way for me, this disempowered way. I can't do this because. What are these like sweeping, generalized black and white stories that we're telling ourselves? Because chances are good, first of all, big sweeping generalizations like that, we know intellectually usually aren't true, right? And the only thing that has to happen to disprove a generalization is it has to be wrong exactly once, right? Um, there's very little that's so incredibly black and white in our world, especially when it comes to like our personal sense of empowerment. You know, that's kind of that's a moving target. There really are oppressive forces in this world, and there really are situations that we don't have control over, and we also really do have free will and agency, and those two things kind of intersect to make our life experience. So we have an opportunity here to say, yes, I have problems. They're real, and some of them come from without me, and I can't control everything, but I can influence probably more than I feel like when this card comes up. And we can begin to ask ourselves, what is this situation reminding me of? Why am I feeling triggered? Which is a word that has been in the public discourse, in the public discourse for a while, and then kind of has been co-opted by certain parties to make fun of it. And that's really sad, because the word triggered, really comes from uh, mental health terminology, and it really refers to having an incident that is external that triggers or brings up an old painful memory that can set you in a self-harm pattern or set you to making disempowering decisions. And being able to have that language to describe what's happening to us is incredibly powerful, because when we have the language, when we know that we have the capability of being triggered, we can make plans around it. So when someone puts a trigger warning at the beginning of a content, like a piece of content on the internet, there's a subset of grumpy ass people who want to tell you that trigger warnings are because we're all sensitive snowflakes now, and those people are kind of, they need to do some shadow work. The truth is, when somebody puts a trigger warning before a piece of content, it means that if you have done your own emotional work and you know yourself, you know your inner landscape, you're able to take a look at that and identify, is it healthy for me to engage with this today, or will it set me back? We all know that we have different days where we feel better or worse, and different days where things from the past will come back to haunt us more or less, and different days when we have more or less emotional resilience. That's human. That's normal. We all experience that. And we also get to decide, if I'm going to engage with this, what can I do to ensure that I do so in a healthy way? It gives ourselves an opportunity to practice like safe and healthy exposure therapy, where instead of getting blindsided by something that throws us for a loop, because someone says something that brings up a lot of pain for us, and suddenly we're in our pain spiral. Instead, we're like, this may bring up pain for us, and I can prepare for it. And this is an opportunity not to be a sensitive snowflake, but to make myself stronger, to say, okay, here I am. I can decide how much I'm able to engage with this, and thus make myself more resilient for when life throws these things at me at unexpected times. It's an opportunity for us to heal and grow and be stronger. Um, and that's where the Eight of Swords really is pointing us to. It's pointing us to analyzing our own internal triggers, analyzing the things that press our buttons. That's a less stigmatized way of saying the exact same thing. When something presses your buttons and kind of activates parts of yourself that are more judgmental, or more shame-based, or more fear-focused, and you're not acting from your rational brain, you're acting from those painful emotions and being more reactive rather than thoughtful and responsive. And the Eight of Swords invites you to explore that a little bit. Now, just the fact of exploring it means that we have an opportunity to step back and be in our rational brain. This is a process called pendulation, where we spend some time experiencing our emotions, and then we spend some time experiencing, like, viewing and looking at our emotions from an outsider's perspective. Like, okay, I am having this emotion. In other words, contextualizing it that we are now observing ourselves having the emotion rather than drowning in the emotion. And then we can allow ourselves to kind of dip a toe in and move back and forth between this rational part of our brain and this emotional part of our brain. And that sweet spot is where a lot of healing can get done. And that sweet spot is what the Eight of Swords is inviting you to. It's inviting you to honor and be real about the fact that you've been hurt in the past, and also move into this observer state in your brain so you can say, well, I have been hurt in the past and I'm watching myself have a big reaction to this. And because I'm now observing this, I'm able to thoughtfully ask myself if this reaction needs to be this big, or if maybe there are ways I could take care of myself to reduce how this is sending me into a spiral so that I can respond from my heart and my wisdom rather than responding from my fear and my shame. And so the Eight of Swords invites us to do that practice of pendulation in real time. So I invite you over the coming weeks to look at things that press your buttons, to get curious about them more deeply, and to take a pause when you're able to, when that happens, and say, let's talk self about what happened there, and begin to unravel this. And this is not about shame and telling yourself you're doing it right or responding right or wrong to the universe. This is just about understanding yourself better, because knowledge is power. Brittany in the chat going, hello, Eight of Swords, my old friend. I know. I see you've tied me up again. So we already know this is going to be a chatty podcast because we are about 25 minutes in, and I haven't even gotten to our kind of main topic of the podcast. I've talked a little about it. Now let's talk about it. The topic of this podcast is releasing, banishing, and my year of no. So that's another thing I'm sharing with you. Eight of Swords, which I didn't choose that card to come up, but thank you, universe. It really was useful for the topic of this podcast. It's my guide card for this year. And my word of the year, so my guide card, I don't select. It selects me, right? I allow it to come up. I shuffle and pull it and allow whatever comes up to come up. And that's been very transformative for me. I've been doing that practice for a little while. And it's meant to be an advice card, not a predictive card. And I also practice a word or sometimes a phrase of the year. And that is manually selected. I choose it based on what I think I need. And my word of the year for 2024, y'all, is no. And I've kind of like shouted from rooftops about it a little bit to hold myself accountable, a little bit because I want people to know. And because I'm like a people pleaser kind of by, I don't know if I want to say by nature, but like that's a big part of my personality, my personal development, whatever you want to call it. And if I have people around me going like, remember your word of the year, and talking about it to me, then I'm accountable to it. And rarely do I want external accountability, but in this case, I really do. Because I need to learn that it's safe to say no. And that is why that's my word of the year. So let's talk about this. No is a word related to this, right? Releasing and banishing. Thank you. Brittany's saying she's proud of me for saying no. Thank you very, very much. Hang on, hydration checkpoint, y'all. I can just hear my voice getting away from me, and I'm like, nope, we take care. Let's start with some definitions. I'm talking about releasing and banishing. Some people approach these two topics kind of broadly as one topic, and I have come to the opinion that it's very important to differentiate between them. And I'll share why. So let's talk about banishing. Banishing is, in essence, a strong form of protection magic, right? Banishing is like, get the hell away from me, right? That's what banishing is magic that says, fuck right off, go away, not welcome, right? Banishing is the magical equivalent of like having strong locks on your doors, and having one of those car theft prevention systems that we used to have in the 80s, like over your steering wheel. Banishing is a hard no to anything external that might come at you and harm you. That's what banishing really is. And especially it's about like, if you sense that something's already there, it's get the hell out, right? We may banish someone who is doing harmful things to us from our lives. We may banish, like negative energy coming at us from people who do not have our best interest at heart, that kind of thing. Banishing is at heart very protective. Now let's talk about releasing, because these are two different verbs, right? When we banish something, we send it away from us. Now, when we release it, we may indeed wish to send it away from us, but we have to acknowledge if we're releasing it, that we've been holding it. Releasing is about letting go of something that we may have difficulty letting go of. This is a thing that gets that I talk about a lot. That letting go is very difficult, and it's like one of these kind of spiritual bypassing phrases, I think, that gets used a lot. And I'm not saying we shouldn't let go, but I hear a lot of people say, just let go of your anger. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And they attribute this quote to a variety of grand people, and you know what, they're not incorrect. And at the same time, it's like to have a truly helpful discourse around things like anger and shame and fear and other negative emotions that we all have difficulty letting go of. We have to acknowledge that it's not as simple as just opening our fingers and letting go, right? We have to acknowledge that we can hold something kind of against our will, that it becomes subconscious and like programming at some point. And so just to let go isn't as easy as all that. And when people are like, let go, when you hold on to anger, it's like you're drinking poison. And it's like, in so many words, that's like saying, stop hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself. Like, we all know that it's not healthy to hold on to our anger or our fear or whatever. And most people aren't like purposely doing it. You know what I mean? And I will also say that there is a flip side where we really demonize a lot of painful emotions, anger being one of them, fear being another, anxiety, shame. And while those emotions suck to experience, they're there for a very good reason, and they're powerful messengers. And I'm here to tell you that we don't have powerful political revolutions that are needed without anger. We don't have social change without anger. We don't have an end to oppression, an end to oppressive and messed up policies without anger. Anger is the powerful, righteous messenger that tells us this is wrong and we must strongly say no. So we need to walk a line of honoring the real importance in our like existence as humans of these emotions that we perceive to be all negative. And we also need to honor in ourselves that because these emotions help us to survive, anger helps us to survive, right? It's one half of fight or flight. And there's now a few more understandings of that, like fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and all of those kind of are associated with their own different emotions, right? Fight is kind of anger, flight is obviously like fear, like get me the hell out of here, right? Freeze is its own fear response, and we see that this has been a very effective survival response in certain animals like possums. Like, they play possum, and that's literally because their predator thinks they're dead already and walks away, right? And fawn is a new word that has come up recently, where people are like, some people have a fawn response, meaning essentially that you attempt to make things copacetic between you and whoever or whatever might be harming you, because that's the survival method you learned. People who grew up in a home where they had to placate those around them in order to maintain their personal safety, then placating may become their default survival mechanism, for example. And that comes out of a few different difficult emotions, right? Like shame is in there, fear is in there. All of these emotions, they're difficult for us to let go of because they helped us to survive, either in our personal history or like genetically in our history as a species, because they have been helpful to us to survive. And appropriately, it's difficult for us to let go of things that have helped us to survive. So when we release, we're letting go. And often when we're releasing something that is like a self-sabotage behavior, or something that, or a belief that doesn't serve us anymore, the reason it's hard to let go is because it did serve us once. it got us through something. Maybe it got us through childhood. Maybe it got us through bullying. Maybe it got us through coming out in an unsupportive environment. Maybe it got us through growing up. Maybe it got us through an abusive situation or a toxic situation. These are behaviors that at one point were survival for us. And ironically, it's because of those very behaviors that perhaps now we're able to go deeper, right? If we have developed a fawn response, for example, meaning that we try to placate those harming us instead of getting away from them, because that's what we had to do, maybe, right, in our past, then the reason that we have survived to tell the tale and survived to worry about that problem is because we did it once and it worked for us at that time. At that time, it was our only option, right? When we were like a 4 or 5 year old and had to do that. And I'm like, this is not something that, like I'm just saying hypothetically. We had to do this. And therefore, it's hard for us to detach from it. And also, even the fact that we've come so far as to be able to think about detaching from that harmful behavior is thanks to that behavior. It's thanks to the fact that we did it once and it got us through it. We survived, right? So maybe we need to stop looking at these behaviors as something we need to banish from our system and start looking at them as like this very painful last resort that we were brave enough to take we really really needed to, and now we don't need to live in our last resort mode anymore, right? We don't need to live in our trauma anymore. Now we've gotten ourselves free, and we need to kind of reprogram ourselves to realize that we've created more safety from ourselves. And that is like the crux of what makes releasing different from banishing. When we banish something, we banish something external that is harming us. When we have something internal that is no longer serving us, that perhaps is harming us, right? If you develop a fawn response, I don't know why I'm like harping on this particular thing. If you develop a fawn response or an anger response or any other response in order to protect yourself in your youth, or if you have generations of people in your family who have developed that, if you have intergenerational trauma, think about people who have Holocaust survivors in their family lineage. Think about people who have domestic violence survivors in their family lineage. Think about every single Black person in America who has, slavery survivors in their lineage, and how painful that is. And I shouldn't generalize, because there have been Black people who have immigrated to America since and maybe haven't had that in their lineage. But, nevertheless, it's like, this is like this big cultural and genetic legacy of pain that we have to overcome. It's not our fault. It's just like what's here, And so releasing our dependence on these things that once helped us or our ancestors to survive is really a tricky business. And it's one that we have to approach with kindness to ourselves. And it's one that we have to approach very, very thoughtfully. And the danger of banishing something when we mean to release it, is that that's how we get the shadow, right? When we're like, I banish this behavior, I banish whatever, I'm making a judgment that this behavior, this thing in myself is bad, and I'm banishing it. And that on the surface sounds healthy, right? Especially if you're banishing something that's not healthy. If you're like, I'm banishing, shame behavior. I'm banishing my tendency to over-explain and apologize when I don't have to do that. That on the surface sounds healthy. That sounds like a choice that you're making that's healthy. But when we say I'm banishing it and we're just like, friggin' goodbye, get away from me, what happens is that part of ourselves isn't like, okay, bye. Like that part of ourselves, all the parts of our identity that are so connected to that, then it's like you're telling your inner self, like, go sit in the corner and think about what you've done. Like, we can't excise parts of ourselves. We don't have the ability to do that, to be like, hey, part of myself that helped me survive in the past, fuck you, goodbye. That's a pretty unkind thing to do to a part of yourself that helped you to survive. And also, like, there is no away. You can't just tell it to go away. There is no away. It's a part of you, right? So then we have this schism in ourselves where we have these dark parts of ourselves, or maybe not even dark parts, just parts of ourselves that are very frightened and in pain and trying to survive. And now, on top of getting us through a really difficult situation with the best toolbox they have, we've been like, fuck you, you're banished. Content warning, I curse on this podcast. So then we have exiles. Then we have parts of ourselves that we have literally done harm to after they have rescued us. And that becomes that becomes very difficult for us to heal. That's when it gets even more complicated, right? And so this is the difference between banishing and releasing, in my personal opinion, in my personal lexicon, that we banish what is external to us. The things that have become internalized, we want to work on releasing them, and we want to do so in a thoughtful and loving way. Because we don't want to tell ourselves, especially the part of ourselves that got us through something painful, like, fuck you, you're not welcome anymore. Which is what we do when we're like, fuck this behavior, I'm banishing it. Instead, we want to Eight of Swords that shit. We want to look at it deeply and be like, there was a reason I did this. There was a reason this became a go-to for me. And now I have to create proof for myself, for that wounded part of me, that it is safe not to do this survivalist behavior anymore, right? To give ourselves a survival level up. And that is the crux of releasing work, is that it's healing work. So banishing magic is protective magic. Releasing work is healing work. Now, you know, there's an overlap, because when we heal, we are more protected because we're able to better see people that might exploit us, for example, and better see situations that we might have previously gone into before unknowing. But banishing work really is that strong boundary work. And releasing work is us learning how to set a healthy boundary with ourselves. It's reparenting work at its core. Y'all, we're getting psychological here. Have we even talked about witchcraft yet? A little bit. A little bit. So, how do we do one versus the other? There's an order of events in my personal opinion. First of all, if someone is directly harming us, or something external is directly harming us, we need to get away from it if we can. However, the reality is, maybe we can't fully, right? And especially, I'm thinking about, here's a question that came up while I was getting ready to make this episode. Can we banish the patriarchy? Can we banish white supremacy? Can we banish racism? Can we banish poverty? Can we banish war? And I think my personal belief is that the unfortunate answer is no, which doesn't mean it's not a worthy pursuit to get rid of those things in our culture and ourselves. It means that it's more tricky work than us all just being like, nope, goodbye, because it's embedded in every single one of us. You know, we talk about internalized misogyny and internalized racism. These are all internalized forms of crappy beliefs, you know, that we had put into our heads when we were pre-verbal by just the culture we grew up in. We didn't exactly ask for it, but now it's there. And it's there from the time we were pre-verbal, so it's pretty friggin' ingrained. And it takes active work to dismantle it. And that's why there is a lot of talk now about things like decolonization, meaning getting your brain out of the idea of the entitlement of white settlers who came to America and other places, friggin' like America, like that's their name for it already. Like already there's colonization present in my language, right? Is us trying to dismantle that. Is us trying to say, okay, this is how it was. Like, this is how we grew up believing. Like, raise your hand if, like me, you went to school and grew up believing that Christopher Columbus was a friggin' great guy who discovered America. And then later in high school, I did have a high school teacher who was like, first of all, he didn't discover America. It's a lot more nuanced than that. But only in my adulthood did I learn about, you know, what a kind of rapey, genocidal, bad person he was. And that, accepting and dealing with that, with the cognitive dissonance of, oh, something I learned from childhood isn't true and might be harmful, is part of the work of releasing. And it has to be done in this context where we release it not just for ourselves, but for everyone. It's good and healthy to, like, I am someone who grew up female. It's good and healthy for me to do the work to release internalized misogyny. I'm also someone who grew up white, and it's very, very important for me to do the work of dismantling internalized white supremacy. And a lot of us are so afraid of associating ourselves with these parts of our society that are correctly demonized. You know, like it's correct to demonize bigotry. It is correct to demonize white supremacy. It is correct to demonize exploitation and slavery and colonization. And at the same time, when we place it so far away from us, we are banishing it rather than releasing it, and we don't acknowledge that it already has our hooks in us in a way that we don't have to blame ourselves for, right? We don't have to have guilt about that. We just have to acknowledge and deal with it, right? We can't help what we grew up with. Just like as I dismantle internalized misogyny, I can't help it that a lot of society kind of taught me that my role as someone with an XX chromosome, and I say that importantly because I'm non-binary and also identify as a woman, and these are like two separate things for me, but like that my role in that way was to, you know, caretake and be emotional rather than logical and be bad at math, right? That's not my fault. None of that is my fault that that happened. But it is my responsibility now that I am older and know that I can do this to begin to dismantle those beliefs, right? And equally, it is my responsibility to dismantle beliefs that I got when I was younger that benefit me, such as like cultural white supremacy, right? It is my responsibility to look deeply at that and look deeply at how when I was in grade school, I was taught that we don't talk about race because it's impolite and that racism is a thing of the past and that colorblindness was the highest value of anti-racism. And I've now learned as an adult how harmful colorblindness is because it can erase the lived experiences of people of color. And it's my job to dismantle that in myself, even though it benefits me. And it's my job to face the fact that it benefits me. That doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It doesn't mean I want it to benefit me. It just means it's my job to be like, oh, wow, this is unfair. I have to set it right. I have to do my part to set it right. And when we do releasing work, it opens up a whole big can of worms. I'm not sure that the work is ever done, you know? It's much like healing work. It opens up a can of worms. So banishing work is something that's very straightforward. It's like, fuck you, goodbye. Releasing work is when we realize that fuck you, goodbye didn't work, and now we have to dig deeper. Thank you, Brittany. I didn't know I was going to be so intense today. Brittany's saying this is a powerful, hard-hitting episode. I'm really grateful that you're here for this, and I'm really grateful that y'all are with me. So I've, you know, like, I guess the reason I chose to do this episode is because these topics have been high on my mind, and it's important to me to do right around these topics, both for myself and for my global society. And I believe that those two are intrinsically linked. I believe that when we do self work, that we can't help but realize I have to also do the work to dismantle this in a larger way. And then that points back to us, like there's a circle, right? Of realizing, wow, I have to dismantle these harmful, unjust beliefs in myself, whether they're towards me or another person. And also, I see that they came out of society, so that points me to external work, like bigger than thoughts and prayers, right? It's good, well and good to dismantle it in my own mind, but I also have to take steps to do what I can to influence our society for better, to try to make the change, you know, that I believe needs to happen. And that too points me back to more inner work as I do that and I bump up against more things and I learn more and more. Oh, there are more things ingrained in our culture that I didn't even know were in my head. And I have to do my dismantling work as well, especially to be like, you know, kind of a responsible foot soldier of justice. That's a term I use a lot personally, being a foot soldier of justice. And I use it on purpose because to me, it represents the exact level of influence that I feel most of us feel we have in the world. We're not a general, right? We're not a commanding officer of justice. We are just a bunch of individuals who individually probably don't feel that empowered to change the collective consciousness. And so if we look at each other as willing foot soldiers of justice, it allows us to say, I'm going to do my small part today, and tomorrow I will look and see what my small part is that I can do tomorrow, and that is how I will show up for what I believe in. Because when we try to take on more responsibility than we can truly own, when we try to say, I want to create change in the world and nothing I do is ever enough, because the truth is nothing we do is enough, right? We can't create it overnight. That leads to burnout. And then good people who want to change the world end up not being able to make their best contribution because they're not taking good care of themselves. So for me, it's healthy to view myself as a foot soldier of justice. Your mileage may vary. And I encourage you to use this term both within your life, like individually, I'm a foot soldier of justice for myself. I'm looking at the things that made me this way, you know, the things that gave me like internalized shame stories and workaholism and like different things that I struggle against in my adulthood. And I'm also looking at the things in our society that I know to be harmful to myself and others, or just to others, because it doesn't have to be about me to be important, right? And doing what I can one day at a time in manageable amounts to dismantle those things. I'm a foot soldier of justice. I'm not the commanding officer. And this is something that I am discovering more and more as I consider my workaholism as well as my people pleasing, which is this unreasonable amount of control that we give ourselves. The parts of ourselves that go into a fawn response, the parts of ourselves that go into an overwork or a shame response, assign more control to ourselves than we truly have. Now, that's a survival mechanism. If you're a 3 or 4 year old and your caregiver is not able to give you what you need and get your needs met, what often happens is that 3 or 4 year old internalizes it and puts that shame on themselves. There must be something wrong with me that my caregiver can't take care of me. It's harmful to their psychology to believe that it's the caregiver's problem because their caregiver literally is their survival at that point, right? A 3 or 4 year old can't really survive on their own. And so if they believe their caregiver is the problem, then they have a much bigger problem. Then their mind has to deal with the fact, like, oh my God, if my caregiver can't take care of me, like, I might die. That's too much. And so a 3 or 4 year old will put it on themselves and say, I'm the problem. What can I fix? And that manifests as we get older as us taking more responsibility than we truly can. That 3 or 4 year old can't control the fact that whatever, like whatever caused that trauma in the moment, like that their parent, like couldn't take care of them in the exact emotional way that they needed, couldn't show up for them the way they needed. Maybe it was intergenerational trauma their parent was dealing with. Maybe it was something as simple as having to be a working parent and not being able to be there for their kid in the way they really wish they could. That kid can't control that circumstance and doesn't even know that circumstance exists. But for their own mental and emotional survival, they tell themselves they can. They're like, well, surely I can fix this. Because if you have no control, then you're like, oh God, I might die, right? And then as we get older, we continue to experience that false sense of extra power, that false sense of like, if only I was good enough, I would be able to fix this. And of course, that's not true, right? We simply don't have that much power. If only I was good enough, I'd be able to fix what? All of society's ills? Like, no, it's just, you're just not that big, pal. And so part of releasing, when we release these behaviors and thoughts and ideas, is also releasing what we falsely believed to be our power, is acknowledging to ourselves, wow, I really can't control this situation. And that can be quite scary for us. As adults, though, we can live with that fear. As a 3 year old, maybe we psychologically can't. But as adults, we can acknowledge, yeah, there are things in life I can't control, and I just have to do my best in faith and try to grapple with that. I wrote a song, which I'll be sharing with you later today. And it's called Vulture. And I wrote it about things like intergenerational trauma. Um, I I really have an awareness of especially what the matriarchal lineage of my family has experienced, and there's a lot of pain around that in my family, and there's a lot of, for me, a lot of kind of like, I feel a lot of righteous anger on behalf of the women in my family and what they experienced in ways that the world and abusive people and harm kept them from leading their biggest lives. And I've talked about this before a little bit. Both my cousin and I believe that our intergenerational legacy as cycle breakers is to lead our biggest, most creative lives as women, because the women in our family have not had that ability to do so. And so this is how we heal the whole family line. And I wrote this song called Vulture, and it was about a lot of internalized shame as an internalized kind of intergenerational trauma and my desire to not continue to carry those things. And art in itself can be this very powerful spell or ritual, and performing it can be a direct and potent way to move energy. Now we move into magic. What does releasing magic look like if it's not as simple as banishing magic, right? Because banishing magic is just like, go, get out. You can look up a lot of banishing spells, and it's fairly simple to do a spell like that. You could do a banishing spell. You could do a freeze spell where you put a harmful influence in the freezer, like write their name stick it in an ice cube. Now that you've frozen them out, they can't affect you. You can do a more thorough banishing spell where, like, um, you do like what's called baneful magic, where maybe you do a jar spell or something with things that are meant to represent like pain and trouble, to literally like push the person away from you by giving them a bad experience when they come at you, right? You can make protective magic. You can create wards around your home. And I'm not going to go too deep into this because I think it's more important for me in this episode to talk about releasing work and what that looks like internally. But those are all things you can look up. You can look up banishing magic and like find a bunch of good stuff. Find a bunch of really good practices to keep trouble from darkening your doorstep. And when it comes to releasing work, it's difficult because we can't banish ourselves, so we have to extricate. And the way I have come to visualize this in my magic and in my kind of like just brain is, if we think about these beliefs and ideas as being like a kind of like spider web like thing that has kind of integrated itself with our being, right? There's us, there's true self, and then there's this like layer of internalized beliefs like trauma, history, intergenerational experiences, cultural experiences, that kind of gets its hooks into us very early, again, when we're pre-verbal. And that's important to know because we learn a lot. We were sponges when we're pre-verbal. Babies learn how to behave before they learn how to speak. Babies learn what gets their parents positive attention and negative attention before they learn how to say words. And that's important because we're soaking up all of these cultural beliefs before we even have language to discuss them, which means that dismantling them with language is a challenge because we don't think them, we feel them. And so for me, I view it as like kind of this spider web like infrastructure of external beliefs that have been put on me. Not that some person did that. I think in some cases, like an abusive person in someone's life is a piece of that puzzle, but I think, we don't have to like go that deep. These are beliefs that don't belong to me that somehow got mixed in with me. And so for me, healthy releasing work looks like extricating those parts from myself and then getting them away so that myself remains intact. And that is as complicated as clearing an infection. If you have a wound, if you, like I fell in a couple years ago, I don't know. I fell after a gig. It was like dark and it was icy, and I kind of like fell and scraped my knee getting out of my car with my guitar on my back. And of course, the first thing I did was like, "Is my guitar okay?" It was, but I scraped my knee and it was like dirty. And it was a lot it was very difficult to clean out that wound, and I still got an infection. Now the infection is representing like these external things that got into me that are harming me, right? But now it's so mixed up with myself. I'm cleaning out this wound and pieces of me are coming off too, right? I'm sorry to be graphic. Um, Point being, once something kind of gets into you that much, it becomes somewhat painful and pretty tricky to extricate it. And I ended up really trying to do that myself, cleaning out the wound well and all of that. And I ended up nevertheless getting like a staph infection and having to go to like a city MD and getting antibiotics for it, which worked. And that's wonderful that we have that tool. But my point being, it can be as complicated as going, how do I clear out an infection? Because kind of it's part of me. It's in there. It's in there with my cells. I don't know how to get small enough to get it out. And that's what releasing work is for me. And that for me is actually where magical thinking is helpful. Because releasing work is healing work. I'm trying to teach myself that these beliefs are not me and I don't have to hold them. And so when I visualize it that way, and I've done releasing rituals over the years, and the way that I visualize it, and I ask for external aid, just like I went and got antibiotics at the doctor when I couldn't solve it myself. I ask for external aid, and this might be, for me, it's often the elements: fire, earth, air, water, spirit. It might be a deity or a spirit or a guide that you work with. It might be your ancestors, but I ask for external aid to help me with this delicate process of extraction. And what that visualization looks like for me is visualizing this kind of spider web lattice work that has pushed its way into my person, and visualizing that external aid having the knowledge and the skill to unhook it and pull it out of me. And that's what releasing work that has been very effective has felt like for me. It's allowing something higher and smarter than me to do it in the same way that I did that by allowing modern medicine, which is higher and smarter than me, because I'm not a doctor, don't have a medical degree, to extricate my infection. That has been very effective for me in terms of releasing work, and that doesn't mean I'm done, you know what I mean? But I mean it's helped a lot, and it's allowed me to change some behaviors when that's the type of visualization that I had. Oh, I love this. Brittany sharing like that she literally wrote a poem called Infection about this topic. I would love to share that poem sometime somewhere on one of my broadcasts if you feel open to that. So what we've learned is banishing work is very straightforward, and that releasing work is less straightforward, and that's a big different thing. Now let's talk about no, which no is banishing magic, right? It's get the fuck away from me, right? That's no. No is like no, hard line, here's the boundary. Now it becomes tricky when we realize that after setting a boundary with someone else, in order for it to be meaningful, we have to set it with ourselves. Oh no. Right? If we have to set a boundary, it's because someone's disrespecting our boundary. And often, if it's not the very first time, it's because we've let them. And that means we have to teach them that we have boundaries, and we have to teach us we have boundaries, which can be equally hard, right? And how often have you found yourself in a difficult conversation with someone where you're saying no, or you're pushing against an idea of theirs that is harmful to you? And what I've realized in those conversations, especially the ones that push my buttons the most, that I feel most intense about proving to them how wrong they are about me, it's not about them, it's about me. Like it's not that they're the jerk, and I mean, maybe their idea is a jerk idea, you know what I mean? But it's about me. And I think a lot about this when I was in the process of leaving my day job. I'm now a full-time creative self-employed person. And when I was in the process of leaving my day job, there were a couple conversations during those last few years. Those couple years where the finish line was in sight, but I wasn't there yet. And there were a couple conversations with people where I opened up to them enough to say like, oh, well, I'm working on quitting my day job and I'm lining up other income, and, shared a little bit about my plan. And there were people in my life who were very encouraging. And there were also people in my life who really weren't. And there was one person who said to me in particular, and it stuck with me, and it's not because it's not about them that it stuck with me, it's about me, who said, well, don't feel too bad if it doesn't work out, because that's very hard and you probably won't be able to do it. And it's not important for me to psychoanalyze that person, but I will share that my personal opinion is that a lot of people who have tried and failed at something will give this kind of advice to someone who is also trying something, and they think they're being helpful. They think they're being like, well, it probably won't work, but like, don't beat yourself up. You know what I want? But what they're really doing is they're stopping you before you even get out the gate, right? They're hobbling with you with this idea that you won't succeed. And it's true, and it's a cliche that I heard in like grade school, but it's true whether you believe you can or you believe you can't. You're right. And these limiting beliefs are something I had to spend a lot of years releasing before I was able to go full time as a creative. It wasn't about my ability. It wasn't about learning how to do my work or my time differently. It was about just shedding the idea that I couldn't. And as soon as I had the idea that maybe I could, I was able to move really fast. And that person, I can't tell you how many nights I laid awake arguing with that person in my head. I can't tell you how many nights I laid awake imagining the perfect cutting thing to say back to them, or not even cutting, just the perfect thing that would show them how super, super wrong they were, And I realized it's not about them. It's not about this particular person. It's about me. I'm trying to prove this to myself, not them, right? And then, no becomes a line that we have to lovingly draw with ourselves. And it's not the same as drawing a line with someone harmful. When someone's doing something harmful to us, it's appropriate for us to be like, no, get away and then do what we can to get them away from us and get ourselves away from them, right? When we have to say no to ourselves, it's important that we do it in a loving way so that we don't create this shadow exile self, right? It's important that we say to ourselves, we've got to find a new way. Let's figure that out together, instead of, God, you're doing this stupid belief again, you stupid idiot. Like, we're not doing that anymore. Damn it, damn it, damn it. Like, when we yell at ourselves like that, that's violence to ourselves. We're giving ourselves new trauma. And as you probably know, when you argue with someone, when you're like, you're so super wrong, I can't believe how wrong you are, and you're mean like that, they're going to hang on to the idea like crazy. So we're really making it more intractable. When we say no to ourselves, we have to like gentle parent ourselves. We have to find ways to say no that stick, instead of just bullying ourselves about it. And there are more than a few like beliefs circulating around the self-care and self-healing world that are kind of rooted in bullying, like argue with yourself, fight with yourself when you hear that limiting belief come up. And I'm just like, I'm not going to be cruel to myself. I just don't think that's a big part of my healing. I think healing is like this deep work of releasing. Let's find out where it came from and let's be gentle, because you wouldn't argue with a 3-year-old kid who said something that you know not to be true. You wouldn't be like, you stupid idiot, we're not doing that anymore. They're 3 years old. They don't know, right? That would be harmful and violent to do to a kid. Equally, it's harmful and violent to do to the 3-year-old part of yourself that's just trying to survive, and learn something that wasn't true because that's what got them by at that moment in their development, right? So we are needing to learn how to set a boundary with ourselves in a nonviolent way. And that brings me to my year of no. I'm in the middle of a year of no right now, and what I've learned about that is that when I set a boundary with someone else, I have to set a boundary with myself. And so my year of no isn't just externally directed, right? This was in part started because I hit a bottom with workaholism in November. It was the first week of November, and I had worked and worked and worked and worked, got COVID, had to take a week off or so for COVID until I, was safe to go out in society again. And also I felt horrible. And then worked and worked and worked to make up for the fact that I wasn't making money while I had COVID, and then kind of got to a place of such profound burnout that I was like, I'm going to either get sick again, or I'm going to fall down and hurt myself because I'm running on fumes. Right. And I hit a bottom, that's a kind of a mental and emotional experience as well as an external experience. I hit a bottom in November, the first week of November. And in part, it was like realizing that all this overwork hadn't solved any of my problems. It had just tired me out. And so I made this very bold and frightening choice, which was to say I won't overwork anymore. And of course, many people who overwork, especially in this culture, are driven by survival. They're driven, myself included, by the fact that, like, especially for me, I'm a self-employed person. If I'm not doing the work, the money's not coming in. No one's handing me a paycheck. And more, wages are not keeping up with inflation. I know way too many incredibly talented people and incredibly kind people and incredibly skilled people who are not able to get work. And I will say even more than that, I know way too many people who are not able to get their basic needs met regardless of their ability, because nobody deserves to not have their basic needs met. And it's ableist to feel like, oh, well, if they're skilled and talented, they shouldn't go hungry, right? That plays into this very ableist idea of like, quote unquote, unskilled labor, meaning if you're not good enough, you don't deserve to live. Wow. Here's something I'm decolonizing and dismantling in myself right now, right? I had to make a very bold choice in faith to say no to myself. And this no looked like I'm not overworking anymore because I have enough experience to know that it has never and will never solve my problem, right? I have enough experience to know that it has never and will never worked and has harmed me. And so I'm going to say no to this thing that is harming me and have to act in faith that something less harmful will come along to replace it. And that is what recovery looks like. It is a step in faith. Now we move into the Eight of Cups for my tarot friends playing along at home, which is about saying no to something and walking away from something that isn't working. It's an act of tremendous courage and bravery because we're walking into a future we don't yet know or understand. All we are able to perceive is everything I've tried has not worked. So I'm closing the door on that and I'm moving forward into a new chapter. And usually there's a real mix of hope and terror. During any recovery journey or anytime you do that, walking away from any, whether it's a toxic behavior or a bad relationship or a job that was harmful to you, there's that mix of hope and terror. My life can be better, but also this is all I know, and I'm terrified because now I have to figure out from scratch. That's what it feels like. And I want to share with you that I believe, in so many words, that the universe kind of rewarded me for choosing that, for choosing to walk away from what wasn't working, because soon after I did, I kind of was gifted an idea. I did a witchy self-care challenge, something I had never done but always wanted to do, and then did a 6-week witchy self-care intensive. And the way that I ended up paying my bills in November and December rather than overworking was through leading this incredibly rewarding experience of self-care and healing, like this circle of witchy self-care. And it was amazing because this idea kind of was gifted to me and I kind of executed it what I would consider to be half-assed because I wasn't willing to overwork. I wasn't willing to, I had to set limits on my hours. This is how I said no to myself. I was like, this is what sober work looks like. You don't work more than this many hours a day. You have a clock out time. You don't work more than this many hours a week. You have days off. And so within those limits, I executed this idea to like the best of my ability without harming myself doing it. And it did the trick. I found that I was able to provide for myself without harming myself. And not only that, but I was gifted with this idea to provide for myself in a way that helped me heal rather than harmed me further. And I do believe there's a spiritual or universal benevolence element to that, and you may not. And because I also am like, wow, when I psychologically healed myself, right? No external belief required. When I psychologically made this choice to show up for myself better, my subconscious was finally free to suggest an idea to me that was much healthier, that I had been blocked from seeing because of all the harm that overwork was doing to me and my burnout. I think both things are true, whichever one you think is true, run with it. To me, I've talked a lot on this podcast about how belief is a tool for me, and I hold on to beliefs that I find really helpful, and these two beliefs I find to be helpful, and I do what I can to dismantle and extricate myself from beliefs that I find to be harmful. I said no to the belief that I have to run myself into the ground to be able to even survive, and at its core, that's what my workaholism was. And I said no to the belief that I have to do more than others and overwork my end to even be worthy of love or survival. And that at its core is also what my workaholism was. And the belief that evolved was, enough can be enough, was that I have it within me to take care of myself and to share my gifts with others in a way that is gentle to myself. And that's the belief I've ended up replacing it with. And I'm still in that process, right? It's not as simple as like, boom, I have the new beliefs. I do have the new beliefs and they're fledgling and I need to gently take care of them. In the same way that if a terrified, abused puppy arrives on your doorstep and you begin taking care of them, they still are going to shy away from a lot of people because they've been kicked before. You're not going to kick them, but they don't know that, and you have to slowly get them to understand that it's safe, and that's what it looks like to change your beliefs. You have to get your survival parts of you to slowly understand that it's safe, that they're not going to get kicked for being kind to themselves. And so that's what my year of no has really been like, and it's only friggin' February. It's about me saying no to these external things, and what no is about for me is overwork. It's also about projects that are not my own, because I care and I'm a community member and there are a lot of people doing a lot of things that I would love to be involved with. People inviting me, and this is a blessing, by the way, people inviting me to like I don't know, sing on their track, co-write something. Do you do guitar lessons? Will you help me make this thing? Will you be in a band with me? It's a blessing that I get these opportunities. And also, when I do have to work a pretty real amount in order to provide for myself, and I'm now navigating what that looks like, even with more boundaries, right? Like working a real amount that doesn't harm myself. When I say yes to everyone else's project, it means I'm saying no to my own projects. When I say yes, I'll play in your band, yes, I'll be on your track, yes, I will do this project with you that sounds super fun, all of it just come from a good, like a real place in my heart. I don't not really want to do those things. It means though that I can't do the things, I can't play on my track. I can't make my own album in a faster way. I can't put my own art out there in the way it deserves because there's only so much of me to go around. And so I said no to these external projects that I truly did want to do because spreading myself too thin is a symptom of my workaholism. And what I've found is that as I've said no to those things, it's enabled me to say yes to myself. And some practices have arisen that I never before had time or energy for, such as the first thing I do when I get out of bed is be creative with myself, is my own creative work, my own creative project. And I'm moving more quickly, so I guess I'm more externally productive on those creative projects. But the bigger impact it has is that I'm a happier person and I feel better about every aspect of my life because I'm doing the thing I'm meant to do. I'm living my calling, you know. It it allows me to live to my full potential in a way that I wasn't when I was spreading myself too thin. And it's allowed me to say yes to what's really meaningful. And that's the crux to me of releasing work. We're saying no to something so that we can say yes to something bigger. When we say no to internalized white supremacy, internalized racism, internalized misogyny, internalized classism, when we say no to those things, we're saying yes to our larger ideal. We're saying yes to being a foot soldier of justice and creating a world where true equanimity and equity and equality thrive at some point. Like we're saying yes to being a part of building that better place, that better world, that better life. And when we say no to spreading ourselves too thin and taking on too much and overworking our end, we say yes to taking really good care of ourselves and giving ourselves what we need to thrive. And we find an increase of energy and an increase of vitality and an increase of joy and hope because we're giving ourselves room to have those feelings instead of living in our survival. So, friends, that's what I have to say about that. I'm going to share in the segment Which You Got This, my own mini releasing and banishing and shielding ritual. It's kind of all of the above that I do each day. And this has become a very important part of my day. This is something that evolved alongside me saying no to overwork. I realized it wasn't enough to just set the boundary. I had to give myself something to replace it. I had to give myself an alternate thing to do when I was overwhelmed and fearful and experiencing the triggers that would lead me to overwork. And the two things I chose at that time were walking and journaling, because walking has saved my life multiple times. Going for walks has saved my life. It is a place where a lot of my spiritual practice exists. It is a place where I am able to think more lovingly as well as more rationally about my life and about what I need and about what is right for me to do. And I think also there's a real somatic component. I think about EMDR and the butterfly method. These are things you can Google that, like, I don't want to like spend a million years talking about, but Google them, it's worth it. Somatic treatments that help people move out of trauma and help people overcome limiting beliefs. And these things seem to be about binaural stimulation. You might have heard that phrase, or binaural beats, things that stimulate both sides of your brain. And guess what walking does? You're like literally doing this pattern, this rhythmic pattern, one leg, then the other leg, then one leg, then the other leg. I believe it is a form of binaural stimulation that helps us to shed, these old beliefs and helps us reframe our lives and helps us heal. For me, that's my truth. I mean, I don't know, like research might come out that I'm wrong. I'm willing to be wrong, but I know that for me, it helps me. Again, I am not, I don't have a PhD. I'm not someone who has Um, I've researched all this actually extensively, but I'm not someone who has done so in any kind of formal way. I've just done this for my own enrichment. And so I'm willing to be wrong, but I'm also here to tell you that my experience is that this is like a healing practice for me. So walking and journaling are the two things. And basically my intent with those was to give myself the gift of this healing practice that has just mysteriously worked for me through a lot of very difficult times in my life, which is walking, and also keep myself accountable to keeping real about stuff. And that's kind of what I mean when I talk about journaling. Not allowing myself to be in denial about things that are not healthy for me. Not allowing myself to be like, it's fine, and kind of like cover over what's really not fine, because that is exactly where I get stymied and land in people pleasing or overwork or spreading myself too thin, is that level of denial. So it's a self accountability practice. And I've walked almost every day since then. There have been days that I haven't, and it's usually not about weather. It's usually about, as a musician, there are sometimes days when I am out all day, and I've had to learn to work around that. I've had to learn, like, okay, if I have 2 gigs and I have a 15-hour day, that means the next day has to be like a 3-hour day instead of an 8-hour day again. Like, it's like, how do I, as a creative person, not overwork and acknowledge the fact that a freelance schedule is not 9 to 5, like, that's just life. And how do I take excellent care of myself around the times when I really am giving a lot in one day, so that I can then spend the next day giving myself the recovery I need instead of pushing myself harder. Anyway, I've done all of this walking, and I've developed this kind of ritual before my walks that I'm going to share with you, and you can please feel free to try this yourself at home. This is Which You Got This. This is a section of the podcast where I just give you an actionable thing. Before my walks, I go outside, and it's been cold, y'all. It's the winter, so I am bundled up, when I do this. And I look forward to the spring when I won't have to bundle up quite so much. But I go outside and I connect with the elements. And the first thing I do, though, is I do my own little kind of purifying ritual where I check in with my body first. I see the state of myself. Just somatic check-in, kind of body scan. How is my breathing? Am I tightening my stomach muscles? That's something I've noticed that I do a lot when I'm stressed. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, body image issues, especially that affect women. That's something that I've always felt uncomfortable about, and I have this like tendency to like suck in my stomach when I'm stressed out. It's like wild. I do that physical check-in, and I experience what's on my mind and what I'm feeling, and ask myself if there are any adjustments I can make. And then I do a little bit of a mini banishing thing where I visualize a white or golden light kind of flowing into me and separating out what is not true self, separating out the drama of the current moment, and separating out, like limiting beliefs that I know are affecting me, and separating out kind of the shit where I'm in my head and not making my most wise decisions, and allowing those things to be released from my, like, leaving behind just my true self. It's kind of a little purification vibe. And I just visualize this happening over the course of several breaths. And then I often visualize some vitality coming up from the earth, kind of shoring me up after that process, because when we do this, when we extricate things like that, it's worth giving ourselves a little boost. We need a little care after that. And I will share that I have taken some of this practice from Jason Miller. Jason Miller, in his meditative practices, recommends visualizing a white light purifying you and a red light from below vivifying you, filling you with strength and vitality. And so this is my version of that. And having done that, I kind of visualize a shield around myself. And this is similar to creating a magic circle for those of y'all that do that. My personal method of creating a shield or a magic circle is different from a lot of people. It's kind of an inside-out approach. You can use any method you like. Some people just visualize, like kind of visually, imaginarily instantiate like a bubble shield around themselves. And for me, I kind of like grow it with my breath, and I do this with magic circles as well. I hold my hands in front of my face, and I breathe into my hands and I allow myself, as though I'm blowing up a balloon, to create this safe space with each out breath, until it is surrounding me. And then a couple more breaths to kind of shore up that energy. This is my protective energy. And the properties that I assign to this shield are that it allows information that I need in, and it allows good energy in, helpful energy in, and energy that is harmful, I'm shielded from. It's going to hit that shield and it's not going to get any further. So it is its own, like, I'm kind of I'm warding myself in a smart way that still allows good things to come in. And then I connect with the elements. Sometimes I ask the elements for help with my shield, or I just connect. And that's a spiritual thing for me. I connect through the space of a few breaths with earth, with air, with fire, with water. I thank them for how I feel they've helped me. I personally also then connect with my home, and I send some protective energy into my home and physically touch my house, and thank it for protecting me. I connect with the land and physically put my hands on the land. I am very, very blessed and lucky to be able to have a home with land around it. And I physically put my hand into the land, and I thank the land and all that dwell within it and the spirits of it for living in harmony with me. I don't view myself as the owner and master of my land. I view myself as in relationship with the land around me. And I kind of communicate that with some direct touch and send some good energy out. And from there, I continue kind of the spiritual practice that is my walk, and that's a little personal to me. But this is an important thing that if I don't do it every day or most days, when I say an everyday practice, a most day practice is good enough, because a habit that you keep doing is good enough, if you brush your teeth every night before you go to bed, right? And there's probably been a night or two where you've stumbled into bed at 2 a.m. and not done it, and you're still okay because you do it almost every night. Yeah, that's the power of habit. So this is something that makes me feel more myself and more whole. It makes me also feel connected to myself. It forces a little bit of a check-in about what feels like self versus what feels like, that kind of external infrastructure kind of pressing into me, and trying to do some very gentle releasing work each day, and also some protecting work to help prevent it from coming back, right? If I'm releasing unhelpful beliefs, if I'm releasing external drama, if I'm releasing that kind of stuff from where it has embedded itself in my system, I then put up a shield so it can't get back in, right? That is my kind of releasing and protection combo that I do as a very small daily practice. I guess you could say that's how I'm a foot soldier of justice for myself in my daily life. That somatic experience has helped me feel more like myself every day and feel safer, especially as I go through this big time of transition. So try this at home. What would your own releasing, banishing, protection daily ritual look like? This takes me maybe 10 minutes. It's not a lot of time, in my day, but it's become an important part of my day. And having done it makes me feel okay, I've shown up for these beliefs that I feel nourish me. And that helps me throughout the day. So try this at home. Let me know. Let me know if you try this, if you modify it. I suggest you modify it if it doesn't work for you. There are times, and Jason Miller talks about this, where if you're doing practices from a particular culture or a particular religion or a particular path of folk magic or ceremonial magic, for example, where it's very appropriate to do things in the way that they are laid out for you, because if you're following that path, it's appropriate to be respectful of that path and learn what you can from it before you just start changing things willy-nilly. And my personal path is a little more of a cobblestone path, which isn't to say that I haven't respectfully and not appropriatively pulled things into my practice that I've learned from other people, and kept them intact as I did so, but that I've allowed my path to evolve to what really suits me. And when I share things that work for me, I hope you will evolve them to suit yourself. I encourage that. Anyway, I'm going to take us out with a song in just a moment, but first I just want to let you know where you can find me. Thank you for hanging out for this ramble. I thank you for spending your time with me today. Time is a precious resource, and I'm grateful that you've decided to spend some time in community and connection with me. If you like this podcast, it really is helpful if you rate it and review it wherever you listen to podcasts. Give it a 5-star rating. Say a couple words, especially about what you like about it. That can be very, very powerful in just word of mouth and getting it to more ears, which is a goal of mine. And if you could take a moment even to share it with someone that you think might be interested, might like vibe with it, I would be grateful for that. If you would like to support this podcast and this larger creative work financially and unlock exclusive benefits, you can do so at patreon.com/Sassafras Tarot for $1 per month or more. Patrons get access to things like extra content, personalized tarot pulls, a witchy Discord community, and more. If you have a question, idea, or suggestion, or you want to talk witchy shit, like just talk for the sake of it, I'm into that. You can email me anytime at sassafrastarot@gmail.com. And you can follow me on social media at Sassafras Tarot on Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, YouTube, and Twitter, and TikTok. And I chose 2 words for my brand name that are difficult for people to spell, so I'll spell it for you. SassafrasTarot. Fun fact about me, I was a spelling bee kid. I was pretty good at spelling. If you would like to order a tarot reading from me, you can do so right now at my Etsy shop, etsy.com/shop/Sassafras Tarot. I'm actually in the middle of kind of revamping my different offerings right now, and I don't know how long that Etsy shop's going to be around. At some point, I'm probably going to switch off what my tarot offerings are, or switch up, not switch off. And so if you want to get a reading from the Etsy shop, kind of now's the time. Also, please know if you're a patron, a lot of my patrons get a discount of varying levels depending on your Patreon support. You can get a discount. So please check your patron benefits, because you should have a code in there that you can put into Etsy and get that discount. I want you to have the discount. You don't have to pay full price. You're already supporting me as a patron. So if you're a patron, make sure you check your patron benefits, or just message me and ask me before you order a reading, because I want you to have that discount if you are ordering one. So as always, I'm going to take you out with a song, and I'm going to share the song I shared a little bit about earlier, which is called Vulture, and this really was an early form of healing and releasing work for me. If you like this song, you can search for me wherever you listen to music. My name is Rorie Kelly, and that is also my artist name, RorieKelly. You can also visit my website, roriekelly.com, or find me on your favorite social media just by searching my name, Rorie Kelly. I thank you for listening. I am doing something new. I'm not performing the song live. That's what I used to do. And in 2024, I have decided that I want you to hear the special recorded versions that I have spent so much time and energy making of these songs that I share with you. So I'm going to be playing this song for you from an MP3. And if you want to go like have this in your collection, you'll be able to find it on Spotify, on Bandcamp, on YouTube, like all the places, that you might expect by searching my name and the song title, which is Vulture. Here we go.